Okay, so I'm very glad to introduce Justin Halberda, who has probably more fields on his belt than anybody else here. He has degrees in philosophy, psychology, biochemistry, and physical chemistry. He did his PhD at NYU with Susan Carey, who does infant reasoning and work similar to what Justin will be talking about today, I think. And then spent time at Harvard and in Paris. He's been here for 3 years in our psychology department, where with his wife Lisa Fagenson, he directs the Infant and Child Development Lab.
Lab for Child Development.
Lab for Child Development. Okay, good. And as a proud papa myself, I am looking forward to hearing insights into my children's brains.
Yeah, right. Congratulations.
Yeah, my daughter has twice been a subject in our lab, and I just got a call from in our lab, and I just got a call from their lab manager today asking if she could do it again.
Is this the same lab that Jushi was?
Well, the same lab? No. It's the same space. It's Peter's old space, and we ripped it out and redid the whole thing basically. But yeah. So my wife and I were on the search for Peter's replacement. That's what our hire was for, Peter's replacement. Okay.
He also comes with the wife.
Peter also comes with a wife. Yes, he did, and
so I
she was an immense help
in the psychology department.
I think it's actually rare,
Oh, really?
as it is in all academics to get two positions.
Small sample decisions are not very good.
Okay, so thanks, Jason. I'm going to be giving a talk that will have a lot of behavioral data in it, and I'll gesture towards some of the modeling work that goes on behind this behavioral data, but I'm not going to be showing you any of the modeling work. I'm happy to talk about that if that's what people would like to focus on, and it's fun to see what kids do, so we get to focus on that during the talk. Okay, so I'm going to give a general outline here. I'll focus on two different systems, conceptual systems. The first is an ability to reason logically, and by that I mean our human ability to take a set of premises, follow them in a serial argument structure to come to some necessary conclusion. We may or may not have such an ability. It's under debate in the literature. The second system I'll talk about is word learning. And people oftentimes think about this ability as somehow domain-specific and focused. Humans may have some special purpose mechanisms designed solely for learning words. So that's why these get white boxes. They would be black boxes, but I have a black background, so you wouldn't see the boxes. They're white boxes. And I'll start off with an observation. The observation is that 2-year-olds learn 8 words per day. This is the equivalent of an urban myth. Urban legend in psychology. It may or may not be true. What we do know is true is kids are either learning 100% of 8 words a day, or they're learning 8% of 100 words a day, or they're learning anywhere in between there, but kids are learning words very, very rapidly. Right? And this rapid learning has led a number of researchers to posit the possibility that 2-year-olds have some domain-specific mechanisms for learning words. Which, if you read the literature, you would not be amiss at thinking that maybe there's a word learning module. Maybe there's a modular system that we've got in our heads for learning words. And the data I'll go through today will suggest that perhaps through an integration of these two abilities, human reasoning and word learning, this rapid learning might be evidence not for a word learning module, but rather evidence that 2-year-olds have some domain general deductive abilities. And so I'll try and make a case that 2-year-olds have domain general deduction and that they bring that to bear on learning new words. Okay, so the first part will be to ask, do 2-year-olds have some deductive reasoning strategy? Second, once we see they have some strategy, let's ask, is it domain general? Can they apply it in multiple domains? And then lastly, we'll get back to this word learning questions and ask, okay, do they bring that ability to bear on learning a new word? The particular argument structure I'll be concerned with is disjunctive syllogism, modus tollendo ponens, more commonly known as process of elimination. And we'll spend most of our time talking about that one. Okay, so here you are. You get to be a subject in my task. I also run adults in tasks, so here you are, you're seated down here between two computer screens. Pictures of objects come up on the screens, and I'll ask you to point at one of the objects. So on any one particular trial, maybe these two come up, and I say, could you point at the ball? And everybody can do that, no problem. And then these come up, and I say, point at the phone, and we all do that. And these come up, I say, point at the DAX. And I think after some delay, if you are like 90% of all naive adults and children, you'll end up deciding to point at this object over here. Those of you who are into vintage guitar amps might say, no, well, that's a vacuum tube from a Gibson. But kids don't tend to think about guitar amps much. So this is a novel object. They've never seen it before. They don't know the name of it. If I say, give them a novel label, like point at the DAX, they end up deciding that, okay, this crazy word must go with this crazy object. But the question is, how do they reach that decision, right? So what is the process that supports this inference that novel words go with novel objects? If you look inside your own head and think about what you would have done, or what you might have done, you might have reasoned something like, okay, this name quotes DAX, either refers to object A or object B. DAX does not refer to object A because A is called a spoon. Therefore, DAX must refer to object B. So this line of reasoning, if this is what you did, that is disjunctive syllogism. It's written there in white, A or B, not A, therefore B. Disjunctive syllogism is any argument that takes that structure. Right? And if kids are using this strategy, this argument structure in particular is a symbolic, deductive, rule-based, serial strategy. Right? You have to work one by one through these steps, A or B, not A, therefore B. If I can find evidence that that's what kids are doing, that's what I would be giving evidence for. So these are written at the bottom as teasers, because these are traditionally quite vexing issues. If we think the mind is correctly described by symbolic, rule-based processes, then I'll be working through a test case for that construal or that implementation. But we might want to see what other ways could you use to make this inference, and we'll actually see that there are other ways to do it. Okay, so I'm going to start with a case, like I said, with number 1. I don't want to go right into the word learning case. I want to go first to a case that I think is more transparently about disjunctive syllogism. So this is an experiment with 2-year-olds. 2-year-olds come into the lab. They come into the room. There's a little table with lots of stuffed animals set up on the table. And the kids get very excited. And I say to the 2-year-olds, hey, Jimmy, do you know what these animals love to do? And the 2-year-olds go, yeah. Because I don't know why, but 2-year-olds seem to think they know what I'm going to tell them. They just, and I ignore that they say yes. And I say, well, I'll tell you anyway. These animals love to race. That's what these animals love to do. And each time, 2 animals come out. So here's lion and lamb. And they run, 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 run. And one of them wins. Oh, lion won that time. Oh, lion won. I say, oh, boy, that's so far for me to reach. Could you help me? So, okay, and the kid says, yes. I say, okay, Jimmy, so I'll bring out the animals, and they'll run, 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 and I'll say who the winner is, and then you grab them and you make them win. Okay, so this is the task, right? I'm going to bring out 2 animals. There's only 2 options. I'm hiding behind the screen so they can't see me. 2 animals come out, and I might say, run, run, run. The winner is the lion. And then Jimmy's task is find the lion, grab the lion, make him win. Okay? So on a particular trial, I might pop in this kind of statement, right? Instead of saying the winner is the lamb, I might say the winner is not the lion. And I'll put it to you that if you want to get this one right, you better use disjunctive syllogism, right? This one is transparently, look, the winner is either A or the winner is B. The winner is not A, therefore the winner is B, right? So this case, if kids succeed at this task, if the 2-year-olds succeed at this task, I think it's transparent that they're succeeding via disjunctive syllogism. I'll look at eye tracking data and pointing data to see if their response times are consistent with that proposal. That they reason the winner's either A or B, the winner's not A, therefore the winner's B. The data that I'll look at in the eye tracking data will be the following predictions. Serially in time, if they're in the midst of thinking the winner's either A or B, they should be looking at chance. Chance should be, look, 50% looking at the lion, 50% looking at the lamb. They don't know which one's going to win, right? Then, as they start to think to themselves, oh, the winner's not A, they should shift fixation over to A, right? as they're thinking about A, they're rejecting A, they say, okay, it's not that lion. Hopefully a shift in fixation to the lion will be correlated with that thought. After they reject the lion, they should return fixation to B, the lamb here, and eventually point to the lamb. So this will be the looking time data I'll be looking for.
Quick question.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have to do to set up A or B in their mind? I mean, how do they know that one of them has to win?
Right. In all the cases I'll talk about, basically the kids just jump on the pragmatics of the task. So
Okay.
the kids, that first premise I don't set up explicitly, I let the task set it up implicitly. And the kids all seem to jump on the idea that, oh, there's two animals, one of them's going to win, and it's only one of them that's going to win.
Okay.
And I never mention that to them, they just naturally go along
So you
with
don't
it.
do this thing where in the first couple of trials, one of them always wins. So those
I, in
three
fact, only
trials
have to
set
do
up-
it once. I only do one example. If they run, just what I did, that's exactly how I do it. They run, and oh, the line wins. Okay, that's it. And now we go into the study. You know, that's it. There's no more training than that. Right, and part of the cleverness of this work is trying to come up with situations that can naturally be construed as ones that involve exclusive disjunctive options, exclusively disjunctive options. Okay, so here's the general looking times graph that I'll look. These are positive trials. These are trials where I would say the winner is the lion. I wouldn't give it a negation. Time is at the bottom in milliseconds. Percent looking is over here on the left side. So on a trial like this where I say the winner is the lion, 100% would be all of the subjects are looking at the lion. 0% would be everybody's looking at the panda. Right? 0 in time marks the onset of the critical stimulus. Here the L in lion. Right? So as I'm saying the winner is the, you have no idea. As soon as I start to say lion, now you start to have information about who the winner is. Right? So 0 is the onset of the critical information. So I take all trials and I split them into two categories. Those trials in which you happen to be fixating the lion at time of label onset, and those trials where you happen to be fixating the panda. Kids love the animals. They're very rarely fixating nowhere. This accounts for basically 90% of the trials. Okay, so if we look at the actual looking time data for these positive trials, this is what we see. In blue, if you're looking at the lion, you're fixating lion, you hear the winner is the lion, you just stay fixated to the lion. And you point. Here is the mean point time. Now, on the trial, while these guys are running out, all the time that's happening up here, the kids have fixated both these animals on 90% of the trials, right? So they know there's a panda over on this side. They already know it's a panda, and there's no reason to go look at the panda, right? Lion and lamb come out, lion and panda come out, you're looking at lion, winner is lion, great, point at lion. In yellow, those trials where they happen to be fixating the distractor, kids very rapidly shift fixation up to the target. So as they hear lion, they're already moving up and they point out here. Critically, pointing on target fixated trials is significantly earlier than pointing on distractor fixated trials. So when you're trying to decide which thing is a lion, the best information for making your decision is in the lion, right? So if you're fixating the lion, you're faster. Okay, compare that to a negation trial. So again, this is a trial where lion and lamb come out, and I say the winner is not the lion. So target is the lamb. Again, splitting the looking into two different categories. We see a different pattern. In red, if you're looking at a lion, I say winner is not the lion. You quickly reject the lion and shift fixation up, and you point here. Looks very similar to what we just saw. But in green, you see a different pattern. If you're fixating the target, now you've already seen that that's a lion. You know it's a lion, okay? You're looking at the lamb. I say winner's not the lion. You can't help yourself. You shift fixation down to the lion, shift fixation back up to the lamb, and you point way out here, okay? And it's in fact 73% of these trials, kids double check. They do this thing that I call double check. The reason why it doesn't ever get down to, say, 27% looking is because kids are double checking at different points in the trial. Sometimes kids will double check early, come back and point. Sometimes they wait, double check back, point. Right? And these two kinds of data, this significant increase in double checks, this dip here, and the interaction of point times on trial types is the two kinds of data I'll take as being my evidence for disjunctive syllogism. So note that, remember on the positive, yes?
Would you please put it back?
Yes.
The previous one. Tell me again, what's the red line?
The red line is their eyeballs when they happen to be looking at the lion at time of label onset, not the lion. And so they shift their eyeballs up to the correct target and they point.
And they stay at the line.
After they point,
Yeah.
yeah, they trail off a little bit. I mean,
And why is it that they don't switch immediately once they realize it's no?
No, they stay
no,
at
no,
the
no,
target.
no, they stay on the lamb. This is looking to the lamb, right? 100% would be looking at the target. So they start off at 0 looking at lion. They get away from him and look to the lamb. Then they choose the lamb. These are all correct. They're correct on 100% of the trials. They choose the lamb.
So maybe I should articulate my understanding of what this graph is. So let's pick the 1,000 millisecond point and just
Yep.
look at the red line, and let's assume that that horizontal intercept is 80%. So what it means is, of all your subjects,
Yep.
at the 1,000 millisecond time, of all the subjects who were looking at the lion when
Yep.
the cue occurred,
Yep.
80% of them were looking at the lamb by that point in time, and the remaining 20% were still looking at the lion.
Yep. That's very close to right. But these graphs are made from subject means.
Okay.
So in fact, if I put the error bars on here, they'd be small.
Okay.
So across trials, 80% of the time the subjects would have gotten to the lamb by now,
Okay.
and 20% of the time they were still stuck on the line.
Okay.
Looking nowhere doesn't count for anything.
Okay.
Looking nowhere means nothing. It
Okay.
doesn't even get on this graph. So yeah, it is true that if it's at 80%, it means 80% of the data is on lamb, 80% of the data is on lion.
And where is the one? Is it at the north or at the
It's
south?
at the L. So the winner is not the, you still don't know who it is, right? So it's 0 is always the information that would let you, the disambiguating verbal information. So L and lion again in this case.
When you say 2-year-olds, people who just turned 2 or the entire 2 to 3 window?
This data is from 20 to 30. Yeah, this data is 20 to 30.
At what age does this typically get applied?
They're all 100% and they all do this. Every single subject shows this pattern.
Do 1-year-olds have this pattern?
I haven't done negation, explicit negation with 1-year-olds, but we'll get to some data all the way down to 14-month-olds. Okay, so let me just go back and because I want this to get clear, because now I'm gonna show you a ton of graphs. So I just want to get this really clear in your mind. If you're on a positive trial, a non-negation trial, right? We see that you don't double check, and the relative ordering of point times tells us that, in information processing terms, the information to make a decision is in the target, right? Blue pointing comes before yellow pointing, telling us that for the information processing of this decision, blue information is the more important information, okay? You get the, go forward. You get the opposite result on negation trials. On negation trials, the ordering of point times is telling you that red information is more important than green information for making this decision, right? And that's what I'm saying is consistent with disjunctive syllogism. These kids are making their decision based on rejection of red information. Red information is the most important information. And I'm going to drive that point home with this data. I told you that kids double-checked at different points in the trial. I could take these green trials and normalize them to the moment at which you got your eyeballs on the lion, the moment at which you got your eyeballs over to him. If I normalize them that way, and the only information that's important to make a decision is information about the lion, those trials should look like the red trials, right? And here they are. That's exactly what they look like. So if you take all those green trials that had a double check and normalize it to the moment at which you happen to get your eyeballs on the lion, they become exactly like red trials. And what that means is a subject that happened to double check at 1,000 milliseconds is way faster than the subject who waits, and then double checks. Okay? So all of this waiting and staring at the target doesn't help him at all. It's worthless to him in terms of his reaction time. His reaction time is solely a function of when does he get his eyeballs on the distractor, which says to us the information critical to the decision is in the distractor. Right? Yeah.
When you say the winner is not the lion, it's a template for the winner is not the lion, it's not the panda.
Yeah.
It's always
New animals on every single trial. They never see the same animal twice. It's just these are just examples. Yeah.
And do you try to confuse them by saying something like the winner is not the bear in this case?
Not the chicken. No, I never did that to them. No. Okay, so I'm not going to be able to show you this figure for all the 8 studies I'm going to go through. This is true of all the studies. but I'm just not going to show you this figure. I'm going to rely on that double check pattern and the interaction of point times throughout the talk. Okay, so great. I show you, I say winner's not the lion and kids double check a lion. And I want to tell you, oh, that's because they're doing disjunctive syllogism. But come on, I mean, I said lion to them. Maybe they're just looking at the lion because I said lion to them. We'd like a case where I don't say anything about the thing's names, and you just spontaneously do it of your own accord. Okay? And so here's another task. This is called the Who Said That game. Same sort of setup. Kid comes in, 2-year-old, 20 to 30. Bunch of animals on the table. I say, hey Jimmy, do you know what these animals love to do? He says, yeah. I say, okay, well I'll tell you anyway. These animals, they like stuff. And they're going to come out and tell you what they like. Do you want to hear what they like? Yeah, I want to hear what they like. Okay, all the animals go away. I hide behind a little screen. One animal comes out. Let's say it's lion. Lion comes out and says, I like cookies. Yeah, I like cookies. Jimmy says, okay, I like cookies. Okay. Do this with 3 different animals. They each like something different. So, and they all have the same sounding voice. It's just the content. So lion comes out and says, I like cookies. Then panda comes out and says, I like soccer. Right? And then chicken comes out and says, I like sandwiches. Right? So there's 2 kinds of things you could like. You could like a food item or a sport or activity. Again, the kids get no training, no explicit commentary on what the game is about. It turns out that in this game, kids jump on the assumption that every animal only likes one thing, right? Which is a totally bizarre assumption, but that's the assumption they make. So on a critical trial, so now they get trials of 2 animals coming out. Okay, lion comes out and panda comes out, and I say, I like cookies. Who said that? Right? Lion said it. They learned it. Lion likes cookies. He's the one that said it. So the task is just who said that? Who said what? On a critical trial, we know he likes cookies. Lamb and lion might come out. They've never seen lamb before in their life. And they hear, I like soccer. Okay, now who said that, right? If the kids use disjunctive syllogism, they have to reason, okay, well, either A or B likes soccer. Soccer's not what A likes. He likes cookies. So therefore, B must like soccer. I'll choose B.
They have to remember it too.
That's right. And we'll see if they do.
And know what soccer is. And they need to know what soccer is.
That's an open question. I think no. Based on their behavior, I think no. But most of them did know these things. Yeah. So soccer, sandwiches, taking walks, cookies. They know what those are. Again, the data, if they're using disjunctive syllogism, should be the same. Chance looking A, B, shift fixation to A, shift fixation back to B, and point to B. Okay? For the positive trials, this would be where they already know lion, and they already know that lion likes cookies. What do? 0 is the C in cookies, the critical stimulus. That looks exactly the same. Blue points come before yellow points. Right? No double check. For the novel trials, now we have lamb up here. They've never seen lamb before in their life. They know that lion likes cookies. They hear I like soccer. In looking pattern, we see the exact same sort of pattern. It's a little bit more dramatic this time of the double check. And the point times also show the same pattern, suggesting that kids are reasoning, okay, it's either A or B, it's not A, and therefore it's B, and they point out here. Okay? So we get the significant increase in double checks. We also get the significant interaction of point times again. In this case, I'm not saying anything about anybody's name. I don't mention lion. It just says, I like soccer, who said that? And the kids do 2 things that are interesting. Number 1, they just jump on the assumption, lion can't like soccer because he likes cookies. That's impossible. How could he possibly like, soccer when he likes cookies? They assume that every animal likes only one thing. And they rely on information about lion. They reject him, that he can't be the right one. They reject him before they make their decision. Showing that, again, they're using disjunctive syllogism to figure out who says that they like soccer. All right, so that's 2 studies. There's 3 or 4 other paradigms that show the same kind of behavior that I'm not going to have time to go through because I want to get into the word learning stuff. But from this data, I would suggest that 2 to 3-year-olds have disjunctive syllogism. I've shown you 2 different domains: social traits of individuals and explicit logical negation. There are other ones. Searching for a hidden object is another case that I see this in, suggesting that it may be domain general. If that's right, 2 to 3-year-olds is way younger than anybody has suggested that kids have a deductive argument structure. Yeah, Barbara?
Oh, no, I don't want to interrupt you in the middle of a sentence, but I do have a question.
All right, I'll finish. I think there's one more bullet. About the question about logical inference, the mood in the field right now is that humans, adult humans, you out there in the audience, you guys don't have any abstract logical abilities either. Not only does a 2-year-old not have them, but you don't have them. What you have instead is some domain-specific heuristics that are alogical, that make you look like you're logical sometimes, but make you look like a fool other times. So an example that some of you might have heard of is the cheater detector mechanism that allows you in social situations to figure out who's not obeying the rules. But if I give you an abstract case, that rule doesn't apply to an abstract case, and now you fall apart. Right? So the field in general has been arguing for the last 15 years that even adult humans don't have an abstract logical calculus that they can apply to any situation. Yeah? Barbara?
Yeah, I actually was wondering how much of this is actually not exactly domain general, but is relevant to the social domain. So it seems like there's something possibly that's really about the pragmatics of social exchange here. And I'm just wondering whether anybody, you or anybody else, has ever done this with just physical events. So if something falls out of a green bin and it's an orange ball, and then there's going to be a blue ball, would a child assume, do you think, that it could not possibly fall out of that same bin?
Right, well, so the challenge is, for that kind of case, the challenge is that, remember, if it is in fact disjunctive syllogism, there has to be two systems that are symbolically related to one another, such that negation can play a role. You have to say, it cannot be that one for whatever commitment, and so it has to be this one. So the case that's closest that I have is searching for a hidden object. But crucially, it's not just hidden anywhere. There's 3 discrete hiding locations. There's 3 colored buckets, a green bucket, a red bucket, a yellow bucket, right? And let's say I let you hide 2 animals. Giraffe is in the yellow bucket, frog is in the green bucket. That's not what they're doing. I'm just saying those so that you can remember them with your, because you guys, your brain isn't as avidly interested in animals and buckets as 2-year-olds are, but it's totally random for a 2-year-old. But let's say frog in green bucket, giraffe in yellow bucket. Now yellow bucket and red bucket come out. You don't know nothing about red bucket. And I say, hey, where's the panda? Right? And the kids will not look for the panda. What they'll do is they'll fixate the green bucket, reject the green bucket, come back to the red bucket, then go after where the panda is. So that's just searching for a hidden object. There's no interaction with the social agent. There's no setup for who did what to whom. The subject actually gets to hide the animals themselves. The problem with raw physical cases is that it's very hard. I shouldn't put this off to discussion. It's very hard to say that the kid is reasoning via explicit negation, which is critical for it being disjunctive syllogism. That's what's really at issue. Jason?
So maybe this question should wait until the second half of talking if someone say so. But there's another extreme, which is instead of relying on physical behavior or eye tracking, you could go to the other end and rely on verbal behavior.
I'll tell a joke.
So there are, some percentage of kids are able to explain themselves before the age of 3.
No, well, maybe your kids, Jason. I'll tell a joke in the word learning case about just such.
Okay,
a
well we can hold off on it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So for part 2, let's ask: does this whatever this process the kids are using, let's say it's disjunctive syllogism, do they use it to learn new words? So back to the case we started with, where I just put up these objects and I say point at the DAX. Now, we said you might reason, well, quotes DAX either refers to object A or object B. DAX does not refer to object A because of some principal commitment, some inductive commitment that gets embedded in this step. Therefore, DAX must refer to object B. So there are principles that have been offered in the literature for why you have such a commitment in step number 2. 3 of the principles that have been offered are consistent with the disjunctive syllogism argument structure. Those are mutual exclusivity, contrast, and pragmatic account. Mutual exclusivity is the suggestion that the lexicon is set up such that you have a domain-specific commitment about the lexicon. Every object gets only a single name, right? Eventually that commitment would get overridden, but this is the suggestion that kids start off with that commitment and it's specific to the lexicon. Contrast is Eve Clark's offer that every word contrasts in meaning, And in that way, it could just be senses, right? So each word has a single sense and a unique sense to it, right? Even though two words might refer to the same thing. So you might have brush and horsehair brush, right? Referring to the same object, but under two different senses, right? Pragmatic account is similar to what Barbara was bringing up, namely that, well, look, if you had meant for me to pick a spoon, you would have said spoon, because we both know the word spoon, and you wouldn't, trick me. You would use the common name that we both know, right? So these are three different proposals for why you reject the spoon as an option. They're all consistent with the disjunctive syllogism argument structure. And the question would be, what would be the computations you would need to make use of these principles? They don't just get to live up there in your head as some principles. You have to actually make use of them to make your decision. There is a proposal in the literature that's not consistent with disjunctive syllogism. That's the novel name nameless category principle. And this principle has been offered for the complementary reason to the decision process, namely, you don't reject spoons, you're just positively motivated to map novelty to novelty. This is basically an associative strategy. You could think about it as parallel competition. You could have if you took trace model of word recognition and gave it the option to think of novel words, you could have basically novel name nameless category. All of possible reference compete. They all beat up on one another and say, none of our names are DAX, and this guy ends up being the only guy who's left around to get a name, right? So parallel competition among all possible reference with the most novel object winning. And that object is novelty specified either by the number of words, number of labels it has, if it's only within the lexicon, or it might engage interaction between semantic space and the lexicon saying which thing is the most novel here, right? Okay, so this would predict a different pattern of looking and a different pattern of point times, because the most important information for the decision under this process is in the novel object itself, right? If you're positively motivated to map novelty to novelty, the best way to make your decision is be looking at the most novel thing. The novel thing holds the most information for you. This thing's totally crazy, I'm very positively motivated to map novelty to novelty. Okay, so let's look at what kids do. These are 2-year-olds on the word learning case. This is two objects come out. Again, target up here, distractor down here. 0 is the onset of the butt and ball. I say point at the ball. Positive trials show the exact same pattern. Again, they fixated both of these objects before I say ball. The objects are actually on the screen blip, for about 3 seconds. They see both of them. They're looking at ball. Which one's a ball? I point at ball. Okay, so the best information for deciding what a ball is in the ball itself. Blue points come before yellow points. On the novel label trials, these two objects come out. I say which one's a DAX. We see the same double check pattern. We see the same interaction in point times. So 2-year-olds, these are in fact older 2-year-olds. They're not 2-0 to 3-0. These are 2.5 to 3.5. Show us that they're relying on disjunctive syllogism to make their decision. This is not parallel competition among all possible reference. If it were, it might predict that you have to, have some information about the spoon, but it wouldn't predict a crossover in point times. At best, it could say that both bits of information are equally relevant if this was some kind of Bayesian inference mechanism, right? You could have weighting of evidence from each one, but if your motivation is positively motivated to map novelty to novelty, information about the novel object would have to dominate that decision process, right? This is again how I said I would gesture towards some of the modeling that goes on behind this stuff, right? So parallel competition in the lexicon, I think cannot make sense or predict this pattern if it's positively motivated to map novelty to novelty. So I want to show you what the behavior looks like, so you get a sense of what these double checks are. Yeah.
I have a question last. When there's a novel object like this DAX,
Yep.
are they tempted more to look at the DAX before the onset?
Younger kids have a fairly large novel object bias, so yeah, they like to look at the novel object. But by the time the kids are 2.5, there's only 6 novel target trials embedded within 24 possible trials, 6 novel distractor trials. So sometimes it will be a spoon as the target, and you just have a crazy thing as a distractor. So the kids get really into looking at all these. In fact, all the objects. In fact, by the time the kids are 2.5, what they like to do is the objects come up and they like to name them. You know, so they'll come up, he'll say, ball, cup, point at the cup. Okay, I did. You know, and then blip, spoon. I don't know what that is. You know, so the kids actively say out the names out loud. So we know they fixated the objects. We know they've retrieved the name, and yet they do this double check. Okay, so again, what the behavior looks like. This kid is sitting between two computer screens. Pictures are coming up on the screens. I've put what's on the screens here so that you can kind of see. The data I'm coding to get the data is I'm coding frame by frame where his eyeballs are fixated. The blip is the objects coming up.
Where's the bed?
Shift fixation points at bed.
Which one is the iron?
Beautifully, you might have noticed reaction time was slower on iron than bed. Iron is lower word frequency and later age of acquisition. All of those results pan out. So this is a known word, but it's harder to know, right? Harder to get hold of. Okay, so you saw both of those cases, known objects. Now let's see a novel trial where he does this double check.
Watch the blick.
Okay, I'm going to show you that again. Notice he fixates both objects before label onset. He knows it's a kite. He goes back over the kite, double check back. Okay. The
Watch the
kite,
blick.
double check, back point. Also, second thing, I like this trial, and then he smiles because he got it right. He doesn't get any feedback, but internally he says, I'm good, I'm smart. I like this trial because, and this is typical. You get this feeling that he's really making his decision based on the kite. He goes, which thing? Oh, it's a kite. And he goes, wham! He doesn't go, oh, that's a kite. Yeah, that's novel. I'll point. There's no delay when he's looking at the novel thing. As soon as he rejects the kite, he points at the blick. I'll just show you.
Watch the blick.
Double check, think, back point. Right? That's basically what kids do. As soon as they reject, they come back and point. Okay. So I'm going to zoom through a couple of things because then we can get to questions. Do kids learn the novel words in these cases? Yes, they do. They learn 6 novel words in the course of this implicit task. They never get any feedback. They get a single trial with each novel object. Okay. They have a total of 3 seconds from the time they hear the label to the point where the objects disappear. So the kids are learning these words from a single trial with 0 feedback in 3 seconds. And some new data that we're going to present at SRCD next week, which I like a lot, they learn the words better if they're given in this inferential situation than if they're taught them explicitly. So there's 2 kinds of trials. I can either bring out the spoon and the DAX and say, hey, which one's a DAX? Right? The computer does it. There's actually no human. Or I just put the DAX up in there and I say, look, this thing is called a DAX. Okay? The kids spend more time looking at the DAX on this instruction trial than they do on the inference trial. Because on the inference trial, they're busy rejecting kites. Right? They spend like 5 seconds looking at the DAX. And yet, in post-test, they don't know these words as well as they know the inference words. Isn't that great? So with less time spent actually looking at the crazy thing, you learn its name better. Yeah? So I'm just going to go through that. That shows that they all learn it. Yes. This is me just saying, look, they have disjunctive. Yes?
Do you give them false words, or do you give them, if they learn something?
No, they are false. And the objects, I just used a photo too because it's a nice picture, but the objects, you see they're things I make up in the lab, like this strange object and that strange object. They're made up objects and made up words. Okay, so again, yes, I think they have disjunctive syllogism. Some more suggested that it may be domain general, and yes, they learn it to learn use it to learn words. Okay, I'm going to zoom through a couple of these. 3 to 4-year-olds see the exact same thing. Adults, you see the exact same thing. Adults show word frequency effects, so they're slower. If you see this, they're slower. They're faster for a spoon than they are for an artichoke. And I just use those as examples. So word frequency of the distractor affects RT, suggesting that adults are in fact retrieving that label. Adults will systematically search all 4 objects if there are 4 different objects instead of 2 different objects, exhaustively. And then, okay, let's spend some time here because this is good. So this is adults within a single study. 2 different kinds of 4 different kinds of trials, but I'll focus on 2. say these two objects come up, I might say on one trial the winner is the DAX. So it's just a standard novel trial, and we see the pattern we've been talking about, the double check and the point, right? But there's another kind of trial, different objects, but let's say we'll use the same ones. I might say the winner is not the spoon. Okay? So if we agree that explicit logical negation is disjunctive syllogism, like process of elimination, I think it's pretty transparently true. And I think that figuring out what a DAX is disjunctive syllogism. They should agree with one another. The looking and the pointing time should agree with one another. And what we see is they're a little bit faster for explicit negation, and that effect is in fact because spoon is a known label, so it's easier to reject this as a case of spoon than it is to reject this as a case of DAX, right? They're a little faster with the green trials, but overall you see the same pattern, the double check back, and the same interaction of point time, saying that explicit negation, winner's not the spoon, you see the same pattern that you do if I say winner is the DAX. Again, suggesting agreement between these two different kinds of trial types. Okay. So I've been talking about 2-year-olds, and I've said, well, that's the youngest we've seen any deductive argument structure in place in kids. Where does it come from? Is it innate? I like that word because it makes people squirm. So let's look at younger kids. Younger kids use this kind of strategy to learn novel labels, but are they using disjunctive syllogism to do it? This is the 2.5-year-olds that I showed you earlier. Okay? And again, I was saying, this dip says disjunctive syllogism. This interaction point time says disjunctive syllogism. Here is some young 2-year-olds. Different looking pattern. And I like this showing the slide because I've been showing you a bunch of slides with double checks. This is a slide that says you could have done something other than a double check. These are kids, they all get the right answer. They all pick the DAX. They all learn the name. They learn the name DAX, but they're doing it via a different process. If they're looking at a DAX, they stay fixated to the DAX. And if we look at, they don't do a double check, and we see the point times don't have an interaction. These kids are faster if they happen to be looking at a novel target, right? They're showing us that for them, the information for what novel labels go to are in novel targets. So they're using that novelty to novelty. They're using some kind of reasoning structure that's similar to novel name nameless category, the other one we talked about. And there's a change happening between these young 2s and the old 2s. In fact,
I don't understand this. Do they know there is a spoon there?
They know it. They've fixated both of them. They're exactly like the other 2-year-olds. The only difference is they're not using disjunctive syllogism. So, in fact, I wrote young 2s.
How do they decide
because they're mapping novelty to novelty. That's a novel word. That's a novel-looking thing. They must go together.
And if you gave them 2 novel things?
Well, neither strategy predicts anything of 2 novel things. So it would not pull apart the 2 strategies.
Well, it might predict different looking strategies. So maybe the young 2-year-olds, if there are 2 novel things, you've got a novel thing, you keep looking at it, and you're perfectly fine slapping the name onto that without even looking anywhere else. I mean, I have no reason to believe that 2-year-olds behave like that. But
well, there's many follow-ups along those lines. Let me get, there's another graph I want to show you, and there's one more thing that's very interesting about this transition.
Let me ask you one more question.
Yes.
So they have a leisure time at which they see both things before you ask them that question?
In this case, it's 4 seconds, and on 80% of the trials, they've looked at both objects.
Yes. So when the question comes up, they are aware what's on the right, what's on the left.
Yes, they're totally aware. And in many of the cases, as I was saying, the kid has actually pointed at that thing and said, "Oh, a spoon," and now they're looking at the crazy thing. Yeah.
So one more question about this. So in this case, you said all these kids actually pointed to the DAX.
All these kids, yeah.
But it looks like 70% of them. Oh, I guess this is again the thing that it's averaged over subjects. That's why none of them ever hits 100, meaning.
Right,
they all looked at it at different
look,
times.
here they all pointed. They're done. I mean, they're
I'm
free to look
thinking
at
about
anything.
when they were fixated on the spoon.
Right. I'm just saying. For instance, this purple one, they're done. So who cares what they do there?
Right.
This one, they all are looking at the DAX when they point to the DAX, but they're getting there at different times. Some kids are getting there really early. Some kids are getting there later.
So that's why this one never reaches.
Yeah, it never goes to 100. Yep. Okay, so I wrote young twos and old twos, but in fact that's a lie. And it's a lie that makes it easier for me to talk about this work, but there's something much more interesting about it. If you look at the kids who show this looking pattern in the 2-year-olds and the kids who show disjunctive syllogism pattern in the 2-year-olds from 2-0 to 3-0, there's no difference in age between them. There is a difference in known vocabulary size. These kids know fewer words than disjunctive syllogism kids. So if you're a disjunctive syllogism kid, you have a significantly larger known vocabulary than if you're a map novelty to novelty kid. Crucially, however, every single kid knows what the spoon is. These kids all know what the spoon is, and their mom reports that it's in their productive vocabulary. So it's not about knowing what this object is that makes you map novelty to novelty or disjunctive syllogism kid. It's how many words you have experience with in your known vocabulary, right? And so here's the question. Is it the case that the kids require some critical number of nouns in the vocabulary to hit upon the thought, aha, the lexicon works via one-to-one mapping, therefore I can reject things that already have a mapping? Or is it the case that once you become disjunctive syllogism kid, suddenly you have a word learning spurt and it's more powerful for learning words? I haven't tracked down that direction of causality yet. Right now it's just a correlation, but it's a significant one. If we look at younger kids, younger than even 2, here's some data from 17-month-olds. We see again a pattern consistent with map novelty to novelty. If they're staring at a DAX, they hear DAX, they just keep staring at a DAX. And crucially, these kids all know what a spoon is, and yet they don't appear to be adhering to one-to-one mapping. They don't reject the spoon when they hear DAX. They don't shift fixation up to the DAX. This really looks associative to me. Namely, I'm looking at a novel object. I hear a novel word. Oh, I feel okay. Yeah, that's kind of DAX-like. Yeah, that's kind of DAX-like. Versus, I'm looking at a thing that I know is called a spoon. I hear a novel word DAX. Not really awesomely DAX. I mean, I guess it's a DAX. Sure, it's kind of a DAX, but it's kind of a cruddy DAX, right? I mean, these kids all succeed if you average this looking together. Succeed meaning they increase looking to the novel object above their baseline preference. But the only reason why they're doing that is because if they happen to be looking at the novel object when they hear the novel name, they really like to stay there. If they happen to be looking at the familiar object when they hear the novel name, they don't like to stay there too much, but they don't reject it. They just, they're like, okay, not such an awesome DAX, I guess, right? So these kids really seem to be behaving associatively to me in their looking. They seem to be saying, not only am I not going to do double checks to reject spoons, but I'm kind of comfortable thinking that that's called a DAX. 17-month-olds are too young to point, so we get no point data from 17-month-olds.
Nobody has the theory that another name for spoon could be DAX.
The 17-month-old seems to.
I see. And later on they don't.
Right. Yep. I mean, I think you have to describe what this looking means. And one possible story is this kid thinks, DAX, that's a pretty decent name for a spoon. I mean, they only get up to 30% looking to the DAX. I mean, 70% of them are staring at the spoon still. Yeah. Okay, so this is a little graph of kind of all the data I've talked about. So I'll end on this graph. This is difference score. So this is how much do you increase your looking to novel objects when I give you novel labels. And for adults, 3 and 4-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 17-month-olds, they all succeed in that respect. They all increase their looking to novel objects across trials. But in the looking time data and the pointing data, I think I've given you a suggestion that these kids are relying on disjunctive syllogism, while these kids are relying on map novelty to novelty. And the transition that's happening in between here is correlated with the number of words you have in your known vocabulary. Yes, I will stop on this figure, and now we can just talk about questions. Oh, Jason's joke. There was a 3-year-old, Jason's joke about kids giving meta-cognitive awareness about the strategy they were using. So kids are not metacognitively aware at age 3 and 4 in general. I mean, that's very late that they know what is the basis of their decisions, right? But I had a 3-year-old who, in one time I ran, he said, oh, can I go in by myself? Does my mom have to come in? And I looked at his mom. She says, oh, he likes to do things by himself. That's okay. I'll wait here. You go ahead and do the thing. So he and I go back and do the study. He does the study. He loves the study. He finishes the study, says, hey, can I bring my mom in and show her the study? I'd say, okay, we can bring your mom in. Bring the mom in, mom's sitting there, you know, ball comes up, you know, whoop, point at the ball. He says, that one. Whoop, point at the wagon, that one. Whoop, point at the dax. He goes, that one. He says, and then he turns around and says, see, Ma, because that one's a spoon. Yep. So this kid, I'm sure he couldn't have said, Mom, you see, I use disjunctive syllogism. but he was,
you know, which one's the disjunctive syllogism?
he was aware that. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the one case of a metacognitively aware 3-year-old. Yeah, Jason.
So one natural, this is great stuff, one natural direction that you might be going in, I don't know, is to be looking for other patterns of reasoning that kids might have.
Mm-hmm.
And there might be lots of ways to try to force them to use different reasoning patterns. One that comes to mind is multilingual kids, or kids who have had some multilingual exposure. So that's not just saying there are 3 objects or 3 names instead of 2. There's 2 axes. When you've got a new word, you have to decide what language it's in,
Yep.
as well as what it refers to. So there might be some more interesting patterns of reasoning, and I can give you an anecdote. You know, anecdotes don't hold any water, but you know, it might inspire some direction for an experiment. So last month, when my daughter was 3 or 4 months, she proclaimed jelly is Hebrew for jam. She's not bilingual, by the way, but she gets a little bit of Hebrew. She gets a little bit of Hebrew education in her day school. So she says jelly is Hebrew for jam. I said, well, no, actually, they're both English words. She said, then they're different foods.
Right, there it is. Yeah, there it is. There's the
Yeah.
commitment.
So I wonder if you could, you know, anyway.
Yeah, well, actually, Roberta Gollenkoff and Kathy Hirsch-Pasek have data on Spanish-English bilinguals, and a number of other people have data on Spanish-English bilinguals, and sign-spoken bilinguals as well. And the pattern is that kids adhere to the principle of mutual exclusivity or contrast within a language. They do exactly what your daughter did. So they'll make an argument that it can be the same thing so long as the word is coming from 2 different languages. If they're within the same language, then they're not allowed to be the same thing. So the kids
Right, the reasoning
exactly
opportunity is these mutual constraints. If they don't know which word the language is.
Right, so if you mess with the
in the
phonology,
case of jelly.
if you mess with the phonology, the kids will rely on the phonology to try and figure out which language the word comes from, and then apply the reasoning. Yeah.
So there's something, I have a completely different spin on this.
Okay.
The youngest kids are the smartest kids because they have the right idea about word object mappings. Because we all know that it's not just one name for object.
Right.
You could call that a spoon or cutlery,
Right.
for example.
Yep.
And the older kids and the adults are actually adhering to some, I say again, pragmatic principle that has to do with, well, he called it a spoon, he called it a dax, most likely he was going to call it, you know, he would have said the other thing was a spoon. He's not introducing yet another new word. And so they're actually doing something that's in a way stupider linguistically, but smarter pragmatically. And so
Well, you'd like to see, and what I'd like NIH to give me money for, is to do a longitudinal study with all of these different tasks to see, okay, in a genuine pragmatic task, can I see that this 2-year-old has no idea what to do, will not make the right choice. But in the word learning case, he seems to use disjunctive syllogism. Right? So you'd like to be able to see a pulling apart of those 2 options. And also, from independent work, we know that the 17-month-olds and the 2-year-olds who are using map novelty to novelty are not comfortable with superordinate labels or subordinate labels. I mean, they are still operating with a lexicon that says, I like basic level kind terms.
yeah, but they can learn multiple level words. Sandy Waxman has data from, you know, I don't know how young they are, they might be 22 or 24-month-olds. It shows under the right circumstances they will accept 2 labels for the same object.
Right, but
So all I'm
my
saying is
prediction
that
would be that the kids, who are disjunctive syllogism kids, right, would actually do better at multi-level than the map novelty and novelty kids. If we look just within the 2-year-olds, because I think that the 2-year-olds that are using disjunctive syllogism are far more sophisticated. They have larger vocabularies. The pattern, I think, would end up going the reverse of what you suggested, namely that the map novelty and novelty 2-year-olds are not would do more poorly at Sandy's task than the disjunctive syllogism 2-year-olds.
Yeah, I mean, the question is what that phenomenon is. Is it something that is outside of the language system, or is it something having to do with sort of a principle about words?
Right. One possibility is that in order to apply disjunctive syllogism, you have to construe the task as involving exclusively disjunctive options, right? And this task with the computer screens is not very natural. I mean, it's just pictures in a computer voice saying things. So it is another. So in fact, I get disjunctive syllogism patterns with explicit negation with kids who don't show disjunctive syllogism for word learning, suggesting the possibility that it might not be something about the lexicon, rather it's something about the construal of the situation, whether the situation involves exclusive disjunction or not. So that's one possibility. But again, that story would be up against, okay, well then why is there this correlation with vocabulary size?
They're
How
getting
could that?
smarter.
They're smarter, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I
be
mean-
smart kids and handy-capable kids or something. Yeah, but I don't think that would end up being the right story. Given that there isn't an easy link between being a smart kid and using this particular strategy and learning lots of words and right.
And one detailed question, which maybe it's distracting from this higher level discussion, but there's a lot of inter-subject variability. So what all do you do to normalize time? I mean, do you?
There's actually not in these tasks.
Okay. Because one of the things that I noticed was that when you recalibrated to the first time they looked at lion in the negation case, that the curve looked a whole lot smoother.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering whether it was part of the normalization, meaning you've taken away the one factor,
Right.
which is
Yeah, that is true, and that's actually really neat that you picked up on it. The difference is that I don't throw away any fixations.
Yeah.
So all the other graphs, there's a number of fixations that were actually planned before the word started.
Okay.
Right? So I've planned to move I haven't heard anything yet. I'm looking at the lion. I plan to move my eyes. As I'm ready to execute move my eyes, you start to say lion to me. So that's an eye movement that had nothing to do with the speech stream, right? That adds noise to my data. The renormalization, all of those eye movements were after the critical stimulus. All those eye movements were about the decision process. That's why it's smoother. So it's thank you for noticing that. I think it's an interesting aspect of the data. Yeah. So that's why it's smoother.
The other possible thing to do would be that if you could, for example, for each child, take all the cases where they were fixated on the right object and you had a positive statement or whatever, and if you could compute their mean time and subtract it out, so you're sort of subtracting out the same thing for each child, so now everything is centered around 0. And I wonder if the data would look very different because it takes care of both a delay in decision and the speed of execution. So those are sort of the two variables, the shift in the time axis and the scaling.
Right. So one of the analyses that's interesting that I didn't talk about is if you look at let's take all the cases where you happen to be looking at the wrong object, and
Right.
I'll just do ball versus cup,
Right.
ball versus dax, whatever. You're looking at the wrong object. You hear the speech stream. We can look at it's basically exponential growth up to an asymptotic level of usually 100, and there's some delay until you point. Okay, so we can normalize all the kids looking to 80% asymptote, their personal asymptote, and then look at the delay between 80% asymptote and point time.
Okay.
And what we see,
okay.
right?
That's the kind of thing I'm thinking.
Yeah, and so what you see when you do that kind of analysis is that kids, for known label trials, they will, as soon as they reject, there'll be a delay of about 150 milliseconds during which they evaluate, and that is, yes, in fact, ball, great point. Okay? If it's a novel target and they've rejected, okay, and they're 80% asymptote, there's a 500 millisecond delay during which they evaluate, and this really is a novel thing I don't know a name of. Yes, it is, I'll point. Right? So there is this, with that kind of normalization, you can see that the kids are in fact thinking to themselves, before I point at this thing, I'm going to make sure that it is in fact something I don't know a name of. And you can look at all those different effects. Also, you can look at effects of word frequency that way and imageability that way. Yeah, so those all turn out.
So have people looked at
novelty as a variable that can be more than binary? Because it seems to me there are a lot of ways in which the two choices differ, aside from some notion that one is novel and the other is not novel. So if you take items and do some kind of norming on how novel they are by how much dishabituation you get, or how much they like to, you said they like to look at novel items more, well maybe they like to look at some of those novel items more than they like to look at other novel items. Is there any work that shows that it really is the more novel item that's pulling the label? So if there were two items, both without a name the child knows, one more novel than the other, then they get DAX, are they really inclined to give it to the second one because it's more novel?
That's a good study. I've never run that because I think it would work, and I don't want to have to write up the paper that says this worked.
But one way to rig it would be...
Surely you could find a way to not make it work.
But yeah, I think that would work, but it would work for the 17-month-olds, and it would not work for the 3-year-olds.
And
The 3-year-olds would say, there's no answer here.
No, but you might be able to rig it, right? So what you do is, on a lot of trials where you say, point to the spoon, let the distractor be a novel object. So it's in one way novel because you don't know what it's called, but another way it's not novel because you saw it last time. I mean, sure, nobody told you what it was, but you saw it.
Right.
So in that sense, it's not novel.
Right.
And then you use that plus a really novel thing in the next one.
Yes.
So you're sort of reduced. Technically, they're both novel, but one is a little less novel because even though you don't know a name for it, you saw it.
Right. It's tough because of the pragmatics of the task. You know, why do you keep showing me this thing over and over again? The kids will hook into that and recognize that, and that will adjust their reasoning. The case closest to that I have is a different situation. Faces come up and they say, will you press my nose? And the task is to try and learn whose voice that is. So you're learning face-voice pairing. And there we manipulate how many times have you seen this face versus how many times have you seen this face and heard its voice, so you do know who it is.
Okay.
And there's interesting data there that is somewhat in agreement and somewhat not in agreement. The older kids do want a reason to be a rejection, and they seem to rely on whichever signal is strongest. Sometimes that signal is from novelty, so you'll in fact see them rejecting the novel face. So they'll say, here's somebody I know I've never seen before in my life. I hear a voice, I think I know that voice, but I don't really know you that well, but I know it's not you because you're totally someone I don't know, so it must be you. So you can actually see kids using the signal from novelty to reject.
Right. Yeah, but that gets back to Barbara's point that this is a social situation and you're using other pragmatics now.
Well, look, that's fine. I'm not worried about what the principle is that's underlying it. I'm interested in what are the computations required to do it. And if doing pragmatics requires that you have a logical calculus of powerful enough to implement disjunctive syllogism, and you work serially, and it's symbolic, and it involves explicit negation, that's fine. That's fine by me. I think it's the computations that are interesting, not so much whether they're embedded within pragmatics or embedded within the lexicon or embedded within something else. I think, in fact, that the range of cases that I've looked at, I think, in fact, you're not going to be able to capture all of them with pragmatics. Say explicit logical negation is not good. Negation doesn't live inside pragmatics. Negation lives somewhere else. So you might need pragmatics to do the task, but you still have to understand what negation means.
So are all children eventually disjunctive syllogists? They are.
I don't know. Yeah, I think I don't know in that. Certainly, the vast majority of them are, but this result with the 2-year-olds is I'm actually only writing it up right now, so I haven't looked at older kids and adults to see if maybe some of them still do map novelty to novelty.
I thought at the beginning of your lecture you said that there is controversy that adults are not even.
Right. Absolutely.
But in your mind, it's settled. Is that right?
In my mind, I would say there's no way for a system to invent logical calculus unless it was capable of representing logical calculus. We have invented logical calculus, therefore we must be capable of representing logical calculus. So to me, the question was settled before we ever got any data. The question was settled with Aristotle or something, you know. So
No, but isn't it possible that this whole notion that we've invented logical calculus itself is a
Yeah, one of the premises in that argument is dubious.
right. It's possible. So yeah, right. But me looking at my data, I would say the data are most consistent with a story similar to what Marty Brain offered, and which was that you don't have the connectives represented as primitives. What you have is some argument schemas, and you have not all of the possible argument schemas. You have a finite number of argument schemas given as primitives, and they cover enough of the connectives that then you can build other arguments out of these simple ones. So modus ponens is going to be one that you have. Disjunctive syllogism is going to be one that you have.
So your answer to the question, is it innate, is yes.
I wouldn't give a talk on that, but yes. My answer to the question is yes. There's a set of approximately 20 argument schemas that are innately specified, of which disjunctive syllogism is one. Jason?
Sorry. Question?
I do have a question. So, for you to make the argument that what children are doing in word learning situations is using this type of logical inference, you have to show that in natural context, they actually make the initial assumption they make, which is one thing applies to one object, right? So the lion can only like cookies. Do they actually make that assumption in natural settings? So if you were to do something like, this is what I had in mind, and you can tell me why this is wrong. So you give them a green line, and you say this line says, I like cookies, right? And then on some trials, you give them the green line, and then a green panda, or something else, something that can be green, not that a line can be green. And you say, you know, I'm green. And in that case, both the lamb or the panda and the lion could be green, right? So you're essentially telling them the thing that's being said could apply to more than one thing, right? And then on the critical trials, you say, whatever, you know, the test case. So I like a DAX, or I like soccer. Are you going to expect to see the same sort of thing that you've seen here?
Right, so you can manipulate either the number of options for the content that they like. So instead of going green, I think you could have asked the same question by saying, imagine you had 3 different animals, all who said they liked cookies, and this other animal liked soccer, and that one liked, you know, sandwiches. And now you get your trial where there's this guy who says, I like cookies. He's one of the 3 guys who likes cookies, and this crazy guy, and you say, I like hopscotch. You know, what are you going to do, right? So that's the question you ask, basically. And, right, I think, yes? So you have multiple individuals who can have the same property, say. Right? I think in that case, they would. My guess is that they would still do disjunctive syllogism because while they've been given evidence that multiple individuals, so you did a one-to-many mapping, not a many-to-many mapping, right? So they've gotten no evidence for a many-to-many mapping. If you gave them evidence for a many-to-many mapping, so lion likes cookies, lion likes hopscotch, lamb likes cookies, lamb likes spelling bees, right? So you give evidence of a many-to-many mapping, I think, yeah, then you would not see disjunctive syllogism reasoning. They would say, oh, this is a many-many, this is an environment of many-to-many.
But that's true of word learning in an actual setting, right?
But I think that's a debate that's been happening in the literature for many years, and it's a heated debate. And someone like Eve Clark would say, no, absolutely not. In words, it's not the case that there are no synonyms. She would say there's no such thing as a synonym.
Or at least it doesn't do any harm to assume that.
Yeah, maybe, right. That might be a weaker version, right? But if everyone ends up assuming that, then there's no synonym. Yeah. Jason.
So thinking again about more complicated reasoning patterns. So suppose, let's go back to this case of two null objects. So suppose you ask the kid, okay, can you make the DAX hit the blit? Okay, now the kid may be confused. Maybe the kid can warm out of it if you say, can you make the DAX and the blit hug? Because then it doesn't matter which way around they are. So one question is, it would be interesting to see if they distinguish between those. But here's a, suppose you've already seen one of the objects in a previous setting, where it's, can you make the DAX and the blit hug? Now you have the blit, now you come back with the DAX and the blit the second time. Can the kid maintain the uncertainty maintain the list of possible solutions to the first constraint, which is this is the DAX and this is the blit, or this is the DAX and this is the blit,
Right.
and carry that forward